Can you retire at 55 with $1.2 million? Well, Joe and Bob are both 55. They have $1.2 million invested. They don't have any debt, and they dream of spending the next decade of their lives traveling the world while they're still healthy enough to enjoy it. So can they retire today? Well, maybe. One version of their plan leaves them with more than $500,000 by the time they're 100, while another version of their plan, they're running out of money in their 80s. Hello, Rainbow people. I'm David.
And I'm John. Welcome to Queer Money, brought to you by the Optimized Investment Partners Portugal Golden Opportunities Fund. More on that in a moment. By the end of this episode, we'll show you which version Joe and Bob are headed toward, what could derail them, and the 3 money moves that they need to make before they quit their day job. Okay, let's meet Joe and Bob and understand their investor profile, and this profile will be consistent throughout this episode. Joe and Bob are both age 55 years old. They have $1.1 million in retirement funding assets. They have $120,000 accessible in cash and taxable investments. As David said, they have no debt. They have a desired annual spending budget of about $60,000. Their investor risk profile is conservative, so they can expect about an average of 5.5% return over time each year. And they plan on starting Social Security at age 70 for their largest combined monthly payment of about $4,000. They have no pension, they have no inheritance that we're including here, and they have no future employment income included in any of these scenarios. Though the story is inspired by true events, Joe and Bob are fictional names, and we've rounded and adjusted the numbers to protect our real clients' privacy and their identities. When we're talking numbers here, we're talking in today's dollars. That means when we do our calculations, we include inflation in the cost of living. Joe has about $750,000 saved and invested, while Bob has another $450,000, bringing them to a total net worth of about $1.2 million. They plan to spend much of their first decade, their go-go years, slow traveling abroad, as many of us dream doing. So let's discuss the 3 tests that they need to do for their dream retirement.
So to decide whether Joe and Bob can retire, their $1.2 million has to pass 3 tests. The first test is the lifestyle test. Can their money support the life that they actually want in retirement? The second is the bridge test. Can they access enough money between age 55 and then 65 when Medicare kicks in and 70 when they finally start getting money from Social Security? And then third, the bad luck test. What happens if the market falls? What happens if inflation stays high? Or their spending quietly starts auditioning for the Real Housewives?
Or Desperate Housewives, more likely.
Right. You see, $1.2 million isn't automatically a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money for a couple spending $60,000 a year. It's considerably less fabulous for a couple spending $80,000 a year. So how much would Joe and Bob need to spend before we would change their answer from, yes, you can retire, to, girls, just keep working?
You better work. All right, so let's run those 3 tests. We'll start first with the lifestyle test. Joe and Bob have already done something that most people never do. This is practically unheard of. They redesigned their lives before they hit retirement. Joe left a high-stress corporate career. They lowered their housing costs. They got rid of most of their stuff. And Bob created a part-time job that improved both their health and their happiness. That matters because neither of them is trying to replace a $150,000 corporate lifestyle with investment withdrawals. They learned that they could build a very satisfying life on much less. For this couple, we're using $60,000 annual retirement budget, including taxes, housing, healthcare, slow travel, food, transportation, and fun. That's $5,000 a month, or more likely after taxes, we're looking at $4,000 to $4,500 of spending money. At first glance, withdrawing $60,000 from a $1.2 million portfolio looks like a 5% withdrawal. And I know a lot of you are clutching your pearls already because you read somewhere that retirees can't withdraw more than 4% from their portfolio before, I don't know, the IRS sends Susie Orman at their house to repossess it. But Joe and Bob don't need $60,000 from their portfolio forever. They need the full amount from age 55 until Social Security kicks in. If they receive an estimated $48,000 combined at age 70, their investment would only need to provide the remaining $12,000 a year after that. So we really have 2 different retirement timelines. From age 55 to 69, their portfolio needs to cover approximately $60,000 annually, which maybe sounds a little bit scary for a $1.2 million portfolio. At age 70 and onward, their portfolio only needs to cover about $12,000 annually, which suddenly that seems a lot more doable.
All right, so let's take a look at the second test here, and this is the income bridge test. This is where many early retirement plans, they just simply fall apart. Joe and Bob have $1.2 million. Where the F is it? Well, if $1.1 million is locked inside some retirement account, a large net worth doesn't automatically create a paycheck next month. They need bridges to these three important ages. First, there's the age of 59 and a half, when access to traditional retirement accounts generally becomes easier because you don't have an IRS penalty. Secondly, there's age 65, when generally you become eligible for Medicare and hopefully your overall healthcare expenses go down. And then there's age 70, when we are assuming they begin Social Security, so they have an additional source of income. So their proposed $120,000 of cash and taxable investments that they have in reserve, well, this covers approximately 2 years of that $60,000 lifestyle. That means they wouldn't have to sell stocks immediately if there was a market drop the day after they retire, which a lot of people are really, really worried about something like that happening. So it's part of the reason why it's good to build up a cash reserve before you retire. But 2 years of cash, that isn't your entire bridge. You see, they still need an account by account plan for where years 3, 4, 5, and beyond. Where does that money come from? Depending on how their money is divided, potential tools that they could use include additional taxable investments, an eligible workplace plan withdrawal strategy, also known as Rule 55, substantial equal periodic payments, also known as Rule 72T, which we are using, Roth conversions, which we're also using, and eventually you have your ordinary retirement account withdrawals. You see, all of these strategies, they have different eligibility requirements and tax consequences. The IRS generally imposes an additional tax or penalty, that 10%, on retirement distributions before you reach the age of 59 and a half. But they recognize some exceptions. Again, those are the qualified separation from service withdrawals, or that Rule of 55, and substantially equal periodic payments, or Rule of 72T.
Okay, we'll dive into the bad luck test or possible adverse scenarios when we run the subsequent scenarios here in a bit. For now, Joe is already considering Roth conversions during their low-income retirement years. That could be very smart, but Roth conversions isn't just about moving money from one cute bucket to another. It actually creates taxable income. And taxable income can affect their federal taxes, their healthcare subsidies, and the amount of cash they need to pay those taxes. So they need to coordinate three things: their annual spending, their retirement account withdrawals, and their Roth conversions. They also want to leave their health savings accounts untouched as longer-term medical reserve. We didn't mention their HSA accounts earlier because they're already invested in the stock market, and so we included that as part of their retirement account balances. That gives them another layer of protection, especially if travel slows or healthcare becomes a little bit more expensive as they live. They still need actual healthcare budget from age 55 to 65. That's the key. Not a we'll be healthy because we like to go dancing every weekend at the club still. That's a wellness plan. It's not an insurance policy. Medicare eligibility generally begins around age 65, while Social Security benefits may continue increasing when delayed beyond full retirement age, with those delayed credits stopping at around age 70.
All right, so let's dive into 3 different scenarios. We're going to be using the Queer Money Retirement Calculator that we use in our retirement readiness reviews here in all of 3 of these scenarios. So here's the first one. For those of you who are listening on your podcast player, we're showing the inside of the Queer Money Retirement Calculator in this video portion of the episode. So bounce over to YouTube and check it out when you have the time. So we're going to continue this assumption that Joe and Bob have this desire to spend $60,000 a year in today's dollars. And under this simplified scenario, they could reach 70 with approximately $1,073,000 still invested, even though they're spending approximately $60,000 a year.
Yes.
Now, after Social Security begins, the portfolio needs to provide approximately $45,000 a year because their $60,000 a year spending in 2026 has grown to $93,000 in 2041 due to inflation. So that Original $12,000 gap that we had talked about before has grown to be a $45,000 gap. At that point, their investments may begin growing faster than their money was withdrawing. Or let me rephrase this: the rate at which they're withdrawing money from their accounts actually slows down for a while, and that's how this version of Joe and Bob could potentially reach 100 years old, as the Queer Money Retirement Calculator shows, still with approximately $557,000. Because their later income covers most of their spending. This gives them room for error, long-term care expenses, maybe a future home purchase, higher healthcare costs depending on where they're living, maybe supporting a family member later in life, or, as we always recommend to folks in our community, that is to leave a legacy once you pass through. So what is our verdict for scenario one? We're going to say yes, retiring at 55 does look reasonable. Now, we want you to please note that this is a planning illustration. This is not a prediction or a guarantee. Remember, markets do not return a tidy straight line every year over year. Nothing is truly forever straight.
All right, let's look at scenario number 2, which we kind of call the lifestyle creep scenario. Now, let's raise their spending by about 10%, from $60,000 a year to $66,000 a year. And magically, the Queer Money Retirement Calculator has already been updated for us. Thank you, David. As a reminder, their investor profile hasn't changed at all. Everything is still the same as we outlined at the very beginning of this episode. But in this scenario, maybe travel costs more than they expected. Maybe they decide that flying in economy is like a hate crime. Maybe Bob develops like this pension, emotional support for boutique hotels. At $66,000 of annual spending, the same simplified model could leave them with roughly $892,000 at the age of 70, which doesn't sound too bad. Social Security could still cover the $48,000 a year, leaving a continuing portfolio withdrawal of about $55,000 a year. And again, remember that their $66,000 in spending in 2026 has now grown to $103,000 in 2041 due to that pesky thing that Donald Trump did not solve called inflation. That plan may still work as the Queer Money Retirement Calculator calculates, but the margin for mistakes are significantly smaller, and they're projected to run out of money by the age of 91, at which point they would have to rely 100% solely on Social Security, which may be a moot point because they may be dead, at which point they wouldn't give an F.
No.
Also, they would have less flexibility for things that David mentioned earlier, for long-term care, for buying a future home and possibly higher healthcare costs, supporting a family later in life, or maybe even leaving a legacy. So for scenario number 2, the verdict, probably, but their spending definitely needs some guardrails.
All right, so let's take a look at our third and final situation here. Now we're going to push up their annual spending by a total of 20%, or to $72,000, as the Queer Money Retirement Calculator shows. And I know we're sounding like a broken record here, but we are continuing to hold all of everything else the same. All we're doing is bumping up that spending by a total of $12,000, or essentially $1,000 a month. We're adding that to their original budget. But over decades, this creates a completely different retirement. Under the same simplified assumptions, the portfolio could be depleted in their early 80s. And that's before adding any major long-term care event, unusually poor investment returns, higher healthcare costs, or maybe even Social Security coming in below the estimates. This is the danger in looking at only the $1.2 million and saying, yay, we have enough money, we have over $1 million, we can retire. You see, a number that feels enormous can support several completely different retirements, but it also could fail other retirements. At $60,000 of annual spending, Joe and Bob look like they're financially independent. At $66,000, they need discipline and flexibility. At $72,000, we discourage them from retiring at 55 without changing something, because otherwise, the Queer Money Retirement calculations, they look kind of precarious.
So what's our final verdict? Can Bob and Joe retire at 55 with $1.2 million? Well, a preliminary answer is yes, but not simply because they're millionaires. They can retire because their target lifestyle costs approximately $60,000 a year. They have no debt going into retirement, which is absolutely huge. Social Security may eventually cover most of their spending. They're flexible about where they live, especially if they decide to move abroad, as we did talk about them one-on-one. They're already proven that they can build a happy lifestyle without a gigantic salary. And we haven't counted potential business income or inheritance, which are possibilities for them. But our yes becomes a no if they can't access their money, if healthcare is missing from the budget, or if their actual spending lands closer to $72,000 than $60,000.
So if you're flexible where you live in retirement and are considering Portugal, look no further than the Optimize Investment Partners Portugal Golden Opportunities Fund. It invests exclusively in listed assets, stocks and bonds. It's cleaner, faster, and fabulous, has golden visa eligibility, requires no Portuguese bank account, and is IRA compatible. Check the link in your YouTube video description for all the details. All right, so what are Joe and Bob to do? Well, we have 3 actions that we think that they should take. And one of those is to set some spending guardrails. You see, Joe and Bob need 3 spending numbers. They need a target number, they need a caution line, and they need a hard ceiling. We would start with their target of $60,000, saying that that's the right target number. Then we would say that they should set a caution line of about $63,000 and a hard ceiling of $66,000. If they cross the caution line, understand and review why that might be happening. If they approach the ceiling, they need to reduce discretionary spending, maybe earn temporary income, or delay a major purchase. The second action here is to build a bridge on paper. They need a year-by-year income map for what they do with their money from 55 to 70. So for every year, they need to answer these questions. Where does the $60,000 come from? Which account is used? How much is taxable? How much is converted to Roths? How is healthcare covered? And how much cash remains after the year ends? They should know the answers to these before their last day of work. And our third and final action for them is to write out their bad market rules now. And we talked about this at the beginning of the video, how to stress test your portfolio. And one of the ways in doing that is by having an action plan. So they should decide in advance what happens if their investment portfolio does drop by 20%. So there are some suggestions that they could take if that were to happen. For example, they may use their cash reserve rather than selling growth investments. They may reduce travel or other discretionary spending by 10 or 15%. They may pause a major purchase. They may recalculate whether or not they do Roth conversions. They may review the plan before committing to maybe withdrawing Social Security earlier out of fear. And finally, they may build a multi-year cash reserve to ride out market volatility. Now, keep in mind, we did say that they have a very conservative profile, so a drop of 20% is less likely for them. But also keep in mind that calm people make better financial decisions than scared people. And the goal of this plan isn't to predict every crisis. It's to prevent a crisis from forcing you into a panic decision.
Joe and Bob's retirement didn't become possible because somebody handed them a magic retirement number. It became possible because they matched their assets, spending, accessible money, future income, and the lifestyle they actually want to live. And if you have money saved, but you can't tell whether or not you're ready to retire, that's exactly how we help people in the Crib Money Retirement Readiness Reviews. Use the link in the description of this video or on your podcast player to schedule yours. Then watch our Gay Retirement playlist to learn how to build the bridge between your last paycheck, Medicare, and Social Security. And until next time, retire by design,
Not by default.